This video is about connecting words in Hebrew. And by connecting words, I basically mean conjunctions and prepositions that are in the front of a Hebrew word. And now, these are some of the most important words, and certainly some of the first words that you should learn in Hebrew. Now, when I say words, as you're going to see, that's a little bit fuzzy because sometimes they are attached right to the front of a word. They are inseparable, as it were, from the word that follows them sometimes. And so they're fairly easy to get the hang of. They're fairly easy to recognize, and yet they're very important. So it's a great place to make our first foray into the grammar of Hebrew. So, for example, the most important of these is the word for and. And the word for and is simply a vav attached to a word. As far as I know, there are no exceptions to this. If you see a vav on the front of a word, it is the word and. Now notice that it's inseparable. It is right on, in this case, haaretz. The the and is it's connected right there onto the next word. Now, of course, originally, none of the words were disconnected from each other. It was scriptio continua. But in the way Hebrew is written today, and in the medieval texts, the way it was written, the vav is connected to the word. And I suppose the reason why that's done is because the way the sounds function within this, the vav functions as if it's right there on the word. And so vav right on the front of a word means and. That's the way Hebrew does the word for and. Now, that's a little different, isn't it? It's a little different to think of the word and as being attached. It'd be as if I were to write and he, and there would be no space between the D and the H. And he, if that was just to be one 5-letter word. That's the way Hebrew does it. So haaretz means and the earth. Normally, of course, the vav is on a verb because usually Hebrew begins a sentence with a verb. And some people in the past have suggested that if the vav is on something other than a verb, maybe it more often is going to mean but, and it's going to be disjunctive. So even though we've said the vav means and, it's quite flexible, and you're going to have to just get a feel for what the meaning best seems to be. Okay, so vav on the front of a word is and plus the word. Now the vav can do some variations in its vowels and the way it looks. So for example, you don't necessarily need to know this if you're not learning the full shebang of Hebrews, but if the vav is in front of either the letter beit, mem, or pei, the bump letters, I'm sorry, I have a tav at the front, that's wrong. The bump letters are beit, mem, and pei. If there is a vav in front of those, then it becomes a sherek. So here we have vein. The V sound comes from the beit, not from the vav in this case. Vein in the example. So this, but it's a vav on the front of a word, and it's going to be translated and, or some kind of conjunction of that sort. Now there can be other kinds of thing. It doesn't have to be a shiva under the vav. For example, here's a va yahi, where there's a patak under the vav. So there can be other things under the vav, other vowels under the vav, and the vav can become a sherek. But basically, if you have a vav on the front of a word, that's the conjunction and. What's a conjunction? You might remember the old Saturday morning song, Conjunction, Junction, what's your function? Hooking up words and phrases and clauses. Well, a conjunction is a little hooker. Oops, didn't mean to say that. is a connector that connects one word to another word. Okay, so vav at the front of a word is and. Now, of course, it can mean other things too. It can mean but. And I know that may sound crazy, because how can it mean both and but, since those are kind of the opposites? But that's just the way it is. And Hebrew, in my opinion, is a very intuitive language, and you just have to get a sense of the feel for what the meaning is there. So there are places where, even though there's another word for or, there are places where just you can sense, you can feel it, that the best translation would be or. Now, sometimes the vav appears in a place where it doesn't even seem to be a conjunction. It just doesn't come into English as if you try to put a conjunction where the vav is, it doesn't work. In those cases, try the word namely. You'll come across it. It'll be weird. You'll have an and, a vav, in a place where it just doesn't make any sense in English. Try the word namely there. Even because sometimes is the feel word you get. I feel a because coming on here. So that can also be kind of the feel that the vav has. Now, again, the key here is to realize that meaning comes from the way words are used. Meaning isn't something in a word. Meaning comes from the way a word is used in a particular kind of construction. And so when we translate from one language to another, it's about trying to get a feel for what is being said. It's not about finding a definition for each word. That's a kind of a kindergartenish understanding of how language works. And so when you're translating something, there is more freedom than now. Of course, you have to be competent in knowing how to read the freedom. There are limits to the freedom, but translating is a matter of kind of getting a feel for what seems to be said. How is this vav, for example, being used? And there is, as you see, a lot of flexibility, I suppose unfortunately for us who are trying to learn Hebrew, but a lot of flexibility in what, for example, what a vav can mean. Now, the conjunction ki is another word that you'll see quite a lot in the Old Testament, and so it can mean for or that. So a lot of times it introduces a subordinate clause, what we call a subordinate clause of some kind. So in Genesis 1, and God saw that good. God saw that it was good. That's what we call a noun clause. What did God see? He saw that it was good. That whole phrase, it's actually two words in Hebrew, that good, is functioning like a direct object to what God saw. What did God saw? What? He saw that good. But it can also be translated as for, which tends to introduce the cause of something. He did this for he was scared. I'm just making that up. But for he was scared explains why, the cause of him doing something. So for and that, I would say, are the primary translations to have in mind for ki. But, if you're using Lee Fields' Hebrew for the Rest of Us, he gives you, a whole bunch of other things that it can mean. If you're a starting student, I would forget that. Just realize that you do have some freedom to intuit, to get a feel for what is being said. It's not just for or that. It can be used in many more ways. Hebrews doesn't have a lot of conjunctions. Greek has lots of conjunctions. Hebrew has a fairly limited number of conjunctions, and it uses them with much more flexibility for that reason, I suppose. You also have to realize that the Old Testament was written over the span of several hundred years, so if you think of the difference between King James English and our English today, you can expect that Hebrew had shifted a little over the time of the writing of the Old Testament, and so you'll find different words for doing things in one part than you might find in another. But so there are other possible meanings that ki can mean. Here's another one, the word for if, im. Again, if you know if, that'll probably get you going. But again, there are always unique constructions. I know that in the psalm that the book of Hebrews quotes, I swore to them they will never enter my rest. In Hebrew it says, I swore if they will ever enter my rest, as if I'll be cursed if they ever enter my rest. It's kind of it's actually if, but it wouldn't be good English to translate it as if. Again, When you learn a language, you realize you increasingly have to realize it's not a matter of one word for one word. It's a matter of getting a sense of how an expression is used. What is it saying? And you have to intuit it. You have to feel it. There's flexibility. And here's another thing: a so-called formal equivalence translation that tries to stick a little bit to the structure of the original language is not necessarily a good translation. Yes, it does give you a better window into the original language, and as a person who's interested in the original meaning, I value formal equivalence translations because they do give me a better window into what the original structure is. But that doesn't make them a good translation. In fact, a formal equivalence translation, for that very reason, may be a worse translation because it doesn't put it in the thought of English. Thought to thought is a better translation than form to form. Form to form is convenient for those of us who want an easy window into the original languages. So formal equivalence is definitely valuable and has its place. But that doesn't make it a good translation. A good translation renders the thought of the original in the target language, not the form. Here's another one. This is the two words we just had. For if, can sometimes be a construction that means but. Okay, now here's finally, as far as conjunctions go, here is the word or. Not frequent, not a frequent word in Hebrew, but there it is. Aleph and Cholam Vav. Okay, so now let's get to some prepositions. The ones that I'm about to, the next three, I believe it is, are very important to learn. Some of the most important words to learn. Like the vav, meaning and, they are inseparable prepositions. That is, they go straight on the word. So when I have bait dash, the dash means that the bait is stuck on to the word. It's like, have you ever seen a movie where a guy can pulls off a wig, and then the guy tries to pull off the wig, but it's the guy's real hair? The bait is attached to the word. It becomes entangled with the word that follows. I don't know if that's the wig that doesn't come off or the wig that does come off, but anyway, bait, meaning in, is never its own word. It never appears by itself as just a one-letter word in Hebrew. The bait is always connected to the word that follows. So in is probably your starter definition here, but it has a lot of flexibility. If you've studied Greek, the Greek preposition en has a lot of flexibility. By, with, in. This bait in Hebrew would have a lot of the same flexibility as the Greek word en does. Here's some more things it can mean. So bait attached to a word. Now, of course, the bait can actually be a word. So bayit means house, and there's a bait on the front of bayit that means house. It's not the word in. It's part. Here's where the wig doesn't come off. Okay, when the bait is in, it's the wig that comes off. But when the bait is attached to the word, it's the actual hair of the word. So bayit, the bait doesn't mean in. In bayit, the bait is the first letter of the word for house. The shua underneath could be a patak as well, so it's not always a shava. Now the dagesh may or may not be there also. Sometimes if the preceding word ended on a vowel, sometimes the dagesh that starts the word, sometimes it'll go away. But so the key is that there is a bait, a bait that is not part of the main word on it. Okay, here's another one. Lamed can do this too. Again, this is a lot like the dative case, the indirect object, say, in Greek. So to or for is a nice way to think of a starter definition for the lamed. I would start with the word to when I'm memorizing it. and of course it has a flexibility of meaning, very similar to the dative case in Greek, except instead of changing the ending of the word in Greek, we're sticking a letter on the front of a word to do it in Hebrew. Again, the shava there doesn't have to be a shava, it can be a patak. Okay, and then kaph can mean like or as. These are the three big inseparable prepositions. Beit meaning in, lamed meaning to, and kaph meaning like or as. Those three are very common and so very helpful to learn right up on the front. Again, it doesn't have to be a shava, it could be a patak. So those are the three big inseparable prepositions. Beit meaning in, lamed meaning to, kaph meaning like or as. Now here's another preposition. Min can mean from, can also be used for comparison, as in greater than. So it can mean than when it's comparing two things. He was greater from me, would be translated, he was greater than me. The nun can disappear. This can be a separate word, min, but so you could have a min with a dash, what's called a makaph. You could have a min with a makaph. Min can be a separate word, but you can also put min right on the front of a word, and when you do that, the nun has a way of just kind of assimilating into the Borg, or a chameleon-like. It gets sucked into that next letter. And so you can have a mem, hirik, and a doubled next letter that is the from word here. The expression you learn, if you're learning the whole shebang of Hebrew, then you learn at some point that nun assimilates when no vowel separates. So if you have a mem, nun, lamed, the nun is going to become a second lamed, and you'll have min, hirik, doubled lamed. Now there are some consonants that don't do doubling. It's just not in their contract. The ayin doesn't do doubling. Hey doesn't do doubling. Chet doesn't do doubling. Aleph doesn't do doubling. These are the four gutturals because they're all said with the back of your throat. So there are some letters that just don't do doubling, and a lot of times to compensate for that, the hirik will become a sere. So you'll have a mem, sere, and then that whatever that guttural is. Again, that's if you really want to learn the whole shebang of Hebrews. Gutturals don't do doubling is the expression there, and in that case you get what's called compensatory lengthening. The hirik becomes a sere. But I'm getting way into the footnotes when I go there, or at least not what I intended to talk about in this video. What I want you to know in this video is that min means from, and that sometimes that min gets connected to the word. It gets sucked onto the front of the word that follows, in which case the nun disappears, and you have doubling usually of that next letter. There are a couple other words for to that are separate words. Sometimes they have a makaph, that dash in the top level of the word. El, this is not the word for God. El can mean God. Israel, El in Israel means God, as in Elohim. It's a shortened form of Elohim. This is not that. This is not El, this is El, and it means, again, to. Very similar is al, with an ayin. It also means it means a lot the same, although it can mean more on or upon. Think of epi in Greek. But I think these two words have an overlapping meaning in Hebrew, and sometimes almost seem interchangeable to me as a Hebrew neophyte. One last word I want to introduce you to, and that's lifnei. Lifnei can be, it's a separate word, and it means before something. So it actually connects to the word that follows, before something. As you'll learn further on in these videos, this is in a construct, what's called a construct form. The construct form means it's kind of magnetically attracted to the word that follows. Literally, you can break it apart. That lamed on the front is the preposition for to, and pani is the word for face. So to the face of is what it somewhat woodenly means, and that in Hebrew translates into English as something like before. So there you have it. Those are the most important conjunctions and prepositions in the Hebrew language. I want to just briefly go to Genesis and show you on this Genesis 1 where you can see some of these prepositions. So in the very first word of Genesis 1:1 we have bereshit, and the first letter there is the word in. Something like in the beginning of, or when is when it's often, when God created, in the head of. So in is the very first meaning bit of the Old Testament. See if we can find another one. Well, there's a vav at the beginning of the second verse, va haaretz. In fact, that's where I took the example on the PowerPoint from. So that's and the earth. Let's go to the second line. Tohu vavohu, the third word, has a vav on the front, which means and. Vakoshek, and darkness. There's another vav that means and. Al, upon. Remember that? We just saw it in one of the last ones. Al panei, on the face of the deep. So al, there's the preposition al. Then we have vav on spirit, varuach, and spirit. Elohim, the word for generic word for God. Al panei, there at the very end of the second line, second to the last word. Al again. Second verse, verse 3, vayomer. The first letter is a vav, meaning and. Let me see if I can find another. Verse 5. Look down to, or the fourth line, second word of the fourth line. Ki tov. There's where I told you that. Ki means that, in this case, that good. God saw the light, that good. Ki can also mean for, but here that is a fine translation. Let's see if we can find another one here. See the 5 off to the right? The next line after the 5, it is actually the fifth line. The second word, laor. God said laor, to the light. There's the preposition la, meaning to, there. Let me scan some more. I'm now in verse 6. Keep scanning. The last word of verse 6, right before the 7, lamayim, to the waters. The waters to the waters. Between the waters to the waters. That's not, again, the way you would put it in English, but don't expect another language to put it the way that we would put it. Asher, maybe I should have put Asher at the end of, you see the line that begins with a 7? The last word in that line is Asher. It means which or that. It's the relative pronoun, the conjunction. Maybe should have included that in the video because it's a very important word. The waters that were under. Now, see the 8, the number 8 on the far right. You have a mem, hirik, and a doubled tav. That's the word from under, and the nun has assimilated because there was no vowel separating between the mem and the tav. So from under. So there's the conjunction from down there where the 8 is on the far right. Well, I think that will do it for this particular example, but I just wanted to show you that these prepositions are everywhere, and so learning them is helpful.